Welcome to the Improving Scottish Football podcast. My name is Kieran Hennigan, and if you're listening for the first time, welcome. And of course, for returning listeners and viewers, it's good to see you again, and sorry I've been away for a little while. Life has got the better of me. So, listen, I wasn't planning on jumping back on the mic this quickly, but we have, at the time of recording, obviously just witnessed both Celtic and Rangers getting pretty humiliated in Europe in the Champions League qualifiers. I'm recording this before the Aberdeen and Hibs second legs, so I'm praying that there could be some sort of miracle there. But, you know, I think regardless, this is a really good time to do a bit of a stock check as to kind of where we are. And my concern is that a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I think generally I'm talking about the media or those in positions of power within Scottish football, aren't seeing the wood for the trees and looking at the bigger picture here. And that's what always tends to happen, right? Football is very reactionary, and we focus on the immediate causes of failures. And 100%, you know, every time we fail in Europe, whether it's Kairat Almaty, whether it's Birkirkara, Sligo Rovers, who else? Connah's Quay Nomads. Possibly the worst of them all. We always find a way to blame the manager, to blame the players, to blame the individual clubs. But this shit keeps on happening all the time, and has done for, 10, 15 years. Scottish clubs in Europe, when we are benchmarked against clubs in Europe and against European competition, what is the pattern telling us? It is telling us that Scottish clubs do not do very well in Europe, generally. I'm going to be very generalist in this podcast. There's no kind of escaping that. Obviously, before everyone shouts at me, I am fully aware that Rangers got to a European final a few years ago, and that Rangers have had great results. And thank goodness for Rangers, because goodness knows where our coefficient would be without them. And I also acknowledge that Celtic had a decent Champions League campaign last year. But broadly, like I say, we have to look at the bigger picture. And what is it telling us? And for me, the general conclusion is that Scottish football is not in a good place. And if you look back to where Scottish football was 20 years ago, which is when I started watching it, well, to be honest, I probably started watching it before then, because I am rapidly aging. But when you look back to those early 2000s, they were the glory days of Scottish football, and we didn't know it then, right? I don't know about you guys, but in the early 2000s, even mid 2000s, I assumed that Scottish football would keep on progressing and growing and developing and attracting more world-class players. But that has not turned out to be the case by quite some stretch. It's amazing how far we've fallen away from those days. You know, back then, Celtic and Rangers were getting through in the Champions League. Obviously, more European finals back then for both of them. And there was a lot of talk back then in the early 2000s of Celtic and Rangers joining the English Premier League. I don't know if you guys remember all that chat, but it was quite hot in the media at the time, because Celtic and Rangers were pretty impressive, and Scottish football broadly was respected as a product. And people in England would watch Scottish football. We had an audience down there to some degree. And the chat then was, if Celtic and Rangers were to move into the Premier League, would they be able to compete for the title, or at least get like a top 5, top 6 finish? That was kind of where people thought they would be. Now, there's obviously zero talk about Celtic and Rangers moving to England. And any chat that there is would be like, would they actually be able to survive in the Premiership? So that alone just shows you kind of how far the levels have decreased in comparison to England. And I know I am comparing us to England here, but we are going to move on to more of our peer leagues shortly. But the point remains is that English football has progressed, developed, and moved on to the point where they just don't need Celtic or Rangers or anyone else. So what does it tell us? I think in reality it tells us that Scottish football isn't in a great place. And I did put it out on Twitter. I said, how many other countries or leagues in Europe have also had a similar decline over those last 15, 20 years? Because the comparison is stark. If you look at those teams that were playing in that era in Scotland, and a few people said Romania, Bulgaria, Serbia, Czech Republic, but that's about it. So we're kind of we're comparing ourselves to, you know, Eastern European countries here. It's pretty depressing, and I am going to come on to some potential solutions. I don't think it's all completely negative. It's not going to be a completely depressing podcast. So I will explore some of that. But I think broadly speaking, we have to do a bit of a stock check and a bit of a reality check, because so many people bury their heads in the sands, especially those in power and sometimes those in the media. But we have to acknowledge the overall pattern. Look at Scottish football as a whole. It could be doing a lot better than what it currently is. And I know a lot of people in Scotland love to laugh at the failings of other clubs in Scotland. And that's one of the things that drives me up the wall, because it is crab mentality that we've got in Scotland. It's such a small-minded mentality that we have in Scotland. The crab mentality, by the way, if you're not familiar with it, it's this concept of, if you were to put one crab in a bucket, it will be able to find a way out often. Whereas if you put multiple crabs in a bucket, they will not let any other crab get out of the bucket. They will drag them down. And because if our club can't have success, we don't want to see other clubs having success. And it's this pathetic cycle that we get into, this pathetic psychology that we have so often in Scotland, where we try and take pleasure in other people's misery, but it's only to hide the fact that our own situation is so poor. Oh man, sometimes, just the Scottish mentality in general, just is not good, man. We need to think of better ways of tying ourselves together and working as one collective to drive up the standard of Scottish football as a whole. And I will come on to that in more detail later, but a rising tide lifts all ships, and we need to lift the overall level of Scottish football. So where is the ambition? Ambition is an interesting word, and that's come up quite a few times in my podcast journey. One of them from Henry McLeish, the former First Minister of Scotland and author of the McLeish Report. He just kept on saying to me, the ambition is too small in Scotland. I think that is absolutely right. And I think that's both on a national level and also at a club level. Like, I listened to Ian Maxwell's interviews about, Scotland, basically implying that we should be happy that we even got to the Euros and that we're punching above our weight. Okay, so we should be happy with that. Take it, guys. We did it. Like, is that the best we can do? Do we not have any ambitions beyond that? Do we not want to try and do what Georgia did in the Euros, for instance, and actually try and win a game or play some attacking football? And what about the clubs? Like, what are their ambitions? Celtic is obviously a great recent example with Brendan Rodgers talking about maybe the board just want to maintain things. There is seemingly no ambition for them to tackle trying to get far in the Champions League or try and get to, the Europa League final. Based on the evidence, like you have to look at what they've done over the last 10, 15 years. Consistently when they get into the European qualifiers, crashing out against Maribor, Molde, Ferencváros, Cluj, whoever else, right? All our clubs should be ambitious. And I see clubs all around Europe being ambitious, even the small ones, right? We're going to come on to some of them, but, Bodo Glimt, I mean, come on, guys. I mean, they're the size of, a St. Johnstone, a St. Mirren, and they're getting to the semi-finals of the Europa League. Have ambition, Scotland. Don't be satisfied with, this is our level and this is where we belong. And on the national front, look at Croatia. One of the key things you find in Scotland is the mentality that we have to look after ourselves first. It's every club for themselves. Self-interest dominates so much of Scottish football. And you can understand it to some degree, right? There is very limited money, especially the further you go down the pyramid, right? So every club does have to fight for themselves. But that self-interest is a killer, right? I'm trying to avoid swearing too much on the podcast. It is holding us back so much by not having a joined up approach and by not pooling resources. Okay? Celtic and Rangers in particular are very culpable of it. And they have no interest in raising the overall standard of Scottish football. But the problem here is that they are missing all the benefits that would bring by raising the standard of Scottish football and maybe redistributing some more prize money, for example. That fear of competition is keeping the SPFL small and weak. Celtic and Rangers and so many other clubs would benefit so much more by better sales of players, because their players will be playing in a better league. It's a more respectable league. They'd be able to sell for higher fees. It'd be easier to attract more players if they're playing in a better league. You would probably have more success in Europe because it's so difficult, or it must be so difficult, to go from playing against a team with a low block one Saturday or Sunday and then midweek trying to then play against Real Madrid or Atletico Madrid or whoever else and getting absolutely torn to pieces just with the contrast in style. That surely is not helpful to European progression. And also, obviously, there are so many benefits to lifting the standard overall. In order to attract, you'd be able to get a better TV deal, better sponsorship, higher attendances. The list goes on. So well done if you're staying with me on this. I know it's a bit ranty, but, over the course of the podcast episodes, I've talked quite politely and delicately about so much stuff. And sometimes you just need a bit of a wake-up call. And I'm also finding it quite therapeutic. So I hope you are too, right? But I think a little bit of frustration and anger is totally merited and justified because we've been served up this sort of stuff for so long. Anyway, let's move on to some comparisons. And specifically, I want to talk about Denmark and Norway because they're very comparative leagues. Similar populations, similar weather, and yet I would argue that in so many ways they are miles ahead of us. And they didn't used to be, right? Again, going back to that 15, 20 years ago, man, we were miles ahead, and the roles have been completely reversed. So let's just take a little bit of a look as to what they do. So first of all, with the league structure. So Denmark have got a similar 12 team league. Sounds familiar. They split after a couple of rounds of games though, so they split earlier. And the club that finishes in the top half of the bottom section can play off against the 4th place team overall for that last European spot. So it keeps it interesting throughout the season. So that's interesting. Every game matters for them, pretty much. For Norway, they've got a 16-team league. It's a pretty straight league. There's no splits. But the key for them is that they play from spring through to autumn. And they take advantage of the good summer weather. And they're fresh for the qualifiers as well. So that's definitely something I think Scotland should explore. And I will be digging into that at some point in a future episode about summer football, because I think there could be huge benefits to embracing Scottish summer weather, summer football in Scotland. In terms of like the governance of both Denmark and Norway, broadly, their governing bodies and their league bodies are quite well aligned. They share goals, they improve the youth system, they try and grow the league. In Norway, the clubs even fund a joint body called the Norsk Top Football, which does analysis, R&D, data sharing, all for the benefit of the league as a whole. And like I say, in Scotland, what's happening? Well, everyone's just looking out for themselves. And nobody is asking what is good for the league and what is good for Scottish football as a whole. And that drives me up the wall. In terms of youth development, Denmark, they're in the top 5 in Europe for the minutes played by under 21 players. In Norway, Odegaard was playing in the top flight at 15, Haaland at 16. And their most recent wonder kid, Sverre Nypan, I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, but he's gone to Man City now. But he was playing at the age of 15. And Hearts fans may remember, he was playing for Rosenborg in the qualifiers. Hearts got through that tie, which is great. But he was fantastic in Norway. I think he maybe had just turned 16 at that point. I went to the second leg at Tynecastle. I'm not a Hearts fan. But I do like to try and get around the grounds. And, they're just not afraid to play these young players. And I think they have got a mentality, as does Croatia and as do other leagues, where they say it's not about if they're good enough, they'll play. It is, we must play them to make them good enough. Right? We have to stop signing journeymen from the English lower leagues and play our young players, guys. Again, a running theme of this podcast, right? And one that I'll dive into more in future episodes. When it comes to the national teams, in Denmark, it's pretty seamless. Like the kids step up from the under-17s to the under-21s to the seniors, all while playing the same style throughout. And Norway's the same. And again, not afraid to give caps to young players. Odegaard was playing for the Norwegian senior team at the age of 15. Can you imagine that happening in Scotland? And I'm going to come on to the Scottish national team in a little while, but I mean, the under-21 situation that's going on there, and the fact it's not being talked about, the fact that we haven't qualified for an under-21 Euros since 1996. And because the tournament is played every 2 years, that means we've missed 15 tournaments in a row. And nobody's talking about this. And what is being done there? Like, where's the scrutiny on the Scottish youth setups? I really... Is it just me who wants the answers to that? Again, what is going on? Can we please get some answers? But Denmark and Norway are proving that smaller nations can thrive, right? It shows what happens when you have structure, alignment, and ambition. So that's a bit of a kind of look at the countries overall. But I also just want to dive a little bit more into the clubs, okay? Because the fans of our clubs want to know where they're headed, right? The very least, even if the club has no ambition, The fans want to know that, right? Every fan wants to be communicated with because the clubs are such an important part of who we are. And we really care whether our football club is doing well or not, okay? And when we're not communicated to and where we don't know what the direction is, what the strategy is, it's so frustrating. So, we're not going to look at your Brentfords, your Brightons, your Bournemouths. We're going to try and look at some really well-run clubs in more of our peer leagues. Like, who can we actually compare ourselves to properly? So, Bodo Glimt, let's just have a little bit more about them. They've got a very clear identity and style, right? Aggressive, attacking football. I think that plays really well in Europe. I think they're kind of set up really well for Europe. They use data-driven recruitment. They have a holistic culture that runs through the whole club, from youth set up to senior team. And everyone is kind of indoctrinated into that philosophy. And you have seen the results, right? From thrashing Roma 6-1 to beating Celtic 5-1 over 2 legs, and obviously to get into the Europa League semi-final. This is a tiny club. Then you've got Nordsjælland in Denmark. They're obviously owned by the Right to Dream Academy. And if you want to know more about them and more about Right to Dream, I've got a great episode specifically about it in the archives. So you can scroll back and listen to that. But they've obviously got this direct pipeline of talent from Africa. And also they get a lot of young Danish kids into their first teams. So they just give an extraordinary amount of minutes to young players. So they're consistently the youngest squad in Europe, 17 to 19-year-olds generally in there. And they have that development first model, which is that they will happily sacrifice short-term results in order to give the players long-term exposure. And they're thinking about the bigger picture. I mean, what an interesting and fascinating club. And then the last one, just to dive into a little bit, is AZ Alkmaar from the Netherlands. So obviously they are competing really well generally against Ajax and PSV and Feyenoord on a much smaller budget. But their youth academy is world-renowned. They prioritize intelligence, game intelligence, technical skills. They use a lot of data and sports science. So obviously the heavy use of analytics. Also huge embracement of AI. And the results speak for themselves. They beat Barcelona 5-0 in the UEFA Youth League final in 2023. So, again, like, they are not a big club. Smaller, I would argue, than Hearts, Hibs, Aberdeen. So what are the common traits across all these clubs? Identity and style, definitely. The youth development baked into their structure. The data and the science. And the alignment, which is strategy. What are we trying to be? Who do we want to be as a footballing club? And then aligning the board, the coaches, the analysts, the players, all with that same vision. So, ambition. The best example of this, obviously, is Tony Bloom and what he has said, and the fact that he expects Hearts to win a league title in the next 10 years, or maybe it was the 5 years. But absolutely brilliant ambition. And of course, lots of people going, oh, you never do it. The classic Scottish mentality of trying to knock anyone down who speaks ambitiously, just like we did with Lennon Miller, trying to take them down a peg or two. But come on, let's embrace this ambition. This is fantastic. And even if they don't get there, just having that ambition can drive up everyone's standards and just make people aim high. And the thing is, I don't think it's impossible, especially when you look at how poorly Celtic and Rangers are currently run. You just need one of those seasons that Leicester City had, really, where things are really lining up with Hearts or another club. and both Celtic and Rangers have stinkers. Like, it is possible. If Leicester City can win it with odds of 5,000 to 1, it is possible in a few years' time. And there is just this void of competency, in my opinion, in Scottish football. Like Celtic might be the strongest team, but they are not particularly well run. And any proper Celtic fan with a little bit of knowledge of the club will tell you something similar. Like, being run by a meddling Irish billionaire who stops you signing big players who will help you in Europe isn't helpful. And that is not the way that any modern club is run. Anyway, so I hope Hearts do really, really well. I think if Hearts do well, I think it would be a huge wake-up call for all the Scottish clubs. And I also think that Hibs and Aberdeen are doing a lot of interesting stuff as well. And I'm delighted to see them and other Scottish clubs utilising other markets and moving away from those lower league English journeymen that we were talking about, and scouting in cheaper and more undiscovered markets. I think that's really got a lot of potential. So, and it's not just those clubs. Like, I think there are good people at a lot of clubs, and there's good people in the governing bodies as well, obviously. Sometimes the main issue is that the people at the very top of clubs, of governing bodies, just don't see they just don't see the need for change. And they're happy with, this is the way that we've always done it, so let's carry on doing it, because it's not broken, so let's not fix it. But to them, not that any of them will necessarily be listening, I would say the famous JFK quote, which is, "Change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future." So this change that we are seeing in Scottish football, whether it's Tony Bloom or whether it's any other club, any other smaller club in Scotland doing things in a different way, that is hugely welcomed from me. And yeah, there are definite signs of positivity. But then, of course, we're going to come on to the last major glaring topic, which is the national setup. And of course, this isn't going to be overly positive. You've had your dose of positivity now. Now I've got to bring you back down to earth. For the record, I pray that Steve Clarke gets us to the World Cup. I want to go to America to watch Scotland play in the World Cup so much. But I'm really worried because the way we play football, I struggle to see us getting out of the qualifiers. I hope I'm wrong. It definitely can happen. But even if we get to the World Cup, the way we play football is so bad. It's embarrassing. The Euros, both times we've gone to the Euros, we've shat the bed. And not just in a oh, we weren't very good. Like, it was embarrassing. That 5-1 defeat to Germany was god awful. I was in England for work, and I was watching it in a bar, and all the people in the bar were laughing at Scotland. Scotland is a joke to so many people, and it is so frustrating because I want us to be respected like we once were. But our football that we play under Steve Clarke is so defensive and uninspiring. 4 shots on target in the last Euros. I just couldn't believe what I was watching. I'm sure I'm not alone. And then to be told afterwards, oh, you know, I didn't hear anyone complain about it. Oh, we should be happy we just got there. I mean, it's just a load of shit. We should be aiming for these tournaments, and we should be aiming to make an impact and play some attacking football. Like, genuinely, I don't mind if we lose 5-1 to Germany, but I want us to have a go and actually have a shot in the game. Is that just me? Surely not. I just want us to play some attacking football. Do what Georgia did. Right? They beat Portugal 2-0, man. So, and we've got the players to do it, you know. I know our squad's not amazing, but our midfield is world class. Like, we do have the ability to have a go. Yeah. So that's obviously a worry. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that we can qualify. And I hope that we can play some good stuff if we get there. And then we've got the under-21 Scotland team. And what is going on there? Like, we have got Scott Gemmell in charge. He's been there for 9 years. He's averaged 1.3 points per match. We have missed out on the last 4 or 5 under-21 Euros under him. Most recently being defeated by 3-1 by Kazakhstan. That sealed our fate in the last round. But we've missed the last 15 tournaments in a row. And where's the accountability for that? Like, what are his KPIs? And I'm not trying to pick on him, right? This is more of a comment on, like, how is this being allowed? How are these things allowed to slip through the net? And why is this accepted? Like, where is the ambition, right? It comes back to this. Like, are we happy? Genuinely, I would love to know, is the SFA happy with that performance? Are we happy not qualifying for any Euro 21s? Because if the answer is yes, okay, it would just be good to know that, right? If there is zero ambition to have any under 21 teams playing in the finals, then okay. But surely we should be aiming higher, and we should be bringing in the best quality coaches that we can. And I think there's also just a bit of a failure to hold everyone to account, not just from the national team, but to clubs as well. And this is where I turn to the media and the media landscape, which is, like, if you're a journalist, I know Scottish football's a small world, and you risk getting kicked out of press conferences and not being invited back. But come on, guys. The softball questions have got to stop, and we've got to do some proper investigative journalism to get to the root causes of so many of these wider issues. Like, I listened to Sports Sound. They had an hour-long podcast with Ian Maxwell on it. And it was one of the worst things I've ever heard in my life. If you can go and dig it up, it is worth a listen. So they had Ian Maxwell for an hour. I think Ian Maxwell spoke for about 5 or 6 minutes in that hour. The rest of the time was spent by pundits just going off on monologues, talking about their own opinions on certain players and the Scottish football setup. It was an utter car crash, and it was so poorly prepared. I really don't understand why it wasn't more of a Q&A to Ian Maxwell to get him to answer the questions. And they kind of came to the conclusion in the podcast that really, Scottish football fans should just be happy with where we are, and anyone who wants more is being unrealistic. It was I felt it a little bit insulting to football fans. And not once did they, you have an hour with Ian Maxwell. Surely one of the top topics is the under-21s. Does no one care about this? It wasn't brought up once. So, that whole standard, the whole media landscape is in a bit of a shit situation. So there we go. Hopefully this podcast hasn't been too depressing. And if you've got to this stage, well done. But I want you to know that, you're not alone in how you feel. There are so many of us who are frustrated, and so many of my friends and people I talk to in the industry feel this way, right? There's a lot of anger and frustration of the lack of change in Scottish football. It's why I set up this podcast in the first place, to have that conversation and try and drive that conversation for change. And I'll keep on doing that. I will be back more regularly at some point in the next few months. But like I say, I've got a young family. I run my own film production business, and life sometimes just gets in the way. But I will be back. So make sure you're liked. Make sure you like, subscribe, or follow. Leave a 5-star review if you can. That'd be huge in helping us grow the channel and continue that conversation for change. Until next time, thank you for listening, and I hope you found this therapeutic.